It is build day here on the BPS Customs YouTube channel. It is my very first crack at Z690. We are building with the 12900K inside of the Hyte Revolt 3. We got to unbox this thing from this crazy Pelican case and get to work. Simple yet stylish, the Be Quiet Dark Power 12 is everything you need in a high-end power supply. From its 80+ titanium certification to its fully modular cable design, Be Quiet left no box unchecked, and they even provide you an easy way to boost your overclocking performance with the flip of a switch. Rest easy with Be Quiet's 10-year warranty and enjoy some of the most efficient and reliable power delivery in the industry with the Dark Power 12. Check out the link below to learn more. So if you guys are new here, thank you so much for coming and checking out this very first Z690 build here on the channel. Make sure to get subscribed if you want to see more of this type of content. We do PC builds, how-tos, hardware reviews, and other tech-related videos. Today, we are taking a crack at Z690 for the very first time, and I am excited. Not only for the performance of this platform, but also because I get to work with some really cool hardware, including this Hyte Revolt 3 case, which they sent to me in this crazy thing, which we're going to take out of the box. But first, let's take a look at the rest of our components and see what we're building with. So if you are going Z690 for the first time, the 12900K is obviously a great place to start. This is Intel's brand new processor in the Alder Lake family, and right now it is their flagship. It's built on what Intel is calling Intel 7, which is really a 10 nanometer process, which is a crazy departure from what they've basically been doing for the last 6 years on 14 nanometer, and we are certainly glad to see it. This chip has a configuration of 8 performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. And that means that tasks that are running on these efficiency cores can do so at a lower power consumption and lower heat load. Whereas if you have something like video editing or even some gaming and you need those performance cores to really kick in, they will do so and provide some serious horsepower. With the introduction of Alder Lake, we also have new motherboards. And that's for a couple of reasons. I've certainly heard the criticisms from some people saying that Intel is always introducing new motherboards with every generation of processor, and maybe to some extent that's true, but this time around I think it's certainly warranted. Not only is the chip physically larger, requiring a new socket, but Intel is also adding support for things like PCIe Gen 5, DDR5 memory, Thunderbolt 4, Wi-Fi 6. And in order to get all that stuff onto motherboards, I think a new motherboard generation is certainly warranted. This right here is the Z690i Aorus Ultra from Gigabyte, and it is actually a DDR4 motherboard. And that is one of the benefits that Alder Lake actually brings, is that it has support for both the older DDR4 memory standard as well as the newer DDR5. Now, why would you want one over the other? Is one faster? Well, technically DDR5 is faster. However, you won't really notice any difference while gaming between using a DDR4 board and using a DDR5 board. So that's why we went with DDR4, because the DDR4 modules themselves are still much more readily available and much less expensive. We're going with a set of Kingston Fury memory here. This is DDR4 3200. It is a 2x8 gig kit. And while I think 2x8 is kind of becoming the baseline right now, and a lot of people are going with a 32 gigabyte kit, 16 is still going to be plenty for our needs here today and allow us to play all of our games without any kind of issue. Now, speaking of Kingston, they also sent over their Gen 4 SSD. This is the Kingston Fury Renegade and has some absolutely absurd specs, including 7,300 megabytes per second read speeds and 7,000 megabytes per second write speeds, which is just way more than you could potentially use, especially in a build like this, for any sustained period of time. This build is really just going to be focused on gaming, and while you're gaming, you don't necessarily need those speeds. However, they're certainly nice to have, and I'm really glad that we're seeing the evolution of M.2 NVMe SSDs for faster and faster speeds. It's definitely going to help out, especially in productivity settings when you're accessing, reading, and writing files all the time, and you really need that speed boost, and it will help to increase your productivity on a daily basis. We've got two MSI products here on the table, both the GPU and the AIO. Let's start with the cooler. This is MSI's new Mag Core Liquid C280, and one of the benefits of going with this Hyte Revolt 3 case is that it supports 280mm all-in-one liquid coolers right out of the box, and the C280 has support for LGA 1700 right here. We don't have to worry about getting any adapter kits or anything like that. MSI has included it in the box, should bolt up great to our motherboard and provide some decent cooling for our 12900K. Now for the GPU, and this is probably something you guys are very familiar with, this is an RTX 3080. This is the Gaming X Trio version from MSI. I've had this since launch and used it for many builds and many applications. It actually was in my daily driver editing system for quite a long time because it provides a lot of power, it runs really cool, and it looks really good while doing so. So this RTX 3080 is gonna pair with our 12900K, and we gotta do something about this case right now. So why don't we see what is in this box? I might be more excited about this part of the build, unboxing this case. I haven't yet even taken out of this Pelican case that they sent over to me, which is just insane. This thing is like crazy overbuilt, and probably something I could reuse at some point. Oh, check that out. Look at this. This is some serious packing material. We got a thank you from Hyte and iBuyPower. Don't scan that. I don't know where it goes. Instruction manual, I guess. Yep. Some instructions and the case itself. We also get this thing up here, which I think is like a bronze backing mesh for the front of the case, because this is a special edition one of these Hyte Revolt 3s. So let's get this out of here. Let's get that installed and check out how this thing looks. So that was actually really easy. It was just pop this panel off right here and then undo 2 screws, and the mesh panel actually just comes right out. And here is the old one, and then the new one goes in, and then now it's got this nice like bronze accent behind there, and it looks really cool. So let's check this case out. For a form factor of this size, this is decent I/O. 2 USB 3.0 Type A, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2, whatever the nomenclature is, Type C, combo headphone mic jack. We've got these headphone hangers on either side of the case. There's one over there too. So they're just like press in and pull out, like spring loaded. So this is depending on the orientation you have your system. You always have a headphone hanger. You have a carrying handle, which I dig, that recesses down in there and clips into place. So that's pretty cool. And other than that, it kind of looks like, you know, an NZXT-H1. I think those comparisons are very fair. But this is a little bit bigger, and the layout internally is a little bit different, and that's good for a couple of reasons. The H1 I really liked, but you have to use a riser cable with that, and as NZXT found out, that runs you into some problems. No riser cable here. The motherboard mounts flat, and then the graphics card plugs in, and then actually just sits normally in the PCIe slot inside. Also, let me take this front panel off. This comes with a 700 watt, 80 plus gold rated SFX power supply already included with all the cabling that you'll need to build your system. So this is going to be a pretty fun build and shouldn't be all that difficult. I would say that if you are a beginner looking to get into small form factor, and one of your concerns has been, you know, working with smaller components is often somewhat challenging, this might be a nice compromise. You don't have to install a power supply. The graphics card sits without a riser cable. The form factor is accessible and seems like it's decently easy to work in. Yeah, so let's get building in the Revolt 3. Okay, phase 1 is complete. We've got our processor mounted in our LGA 1700 socket. We've got our backplate mounted for our cooler with the standoffs. And this is one of the things that I hate about small form factor builds. These standoffs, this one here and this one here, no problem. That one there and that one there, meant that significant bits of brine were left on this very sharp actual finned heatsink as I tried to screw them in. And also here, not a lot of room either. So kind of an unpleasant experience, but that's just because I have stupid fat fingers. Other than that, everything went fine. M.2 is installed under this heatsink right here. And this motherboard actually has a stacked M.2 configuration. So both M.2s are under there as opposed to on the back where they normally are because this has thermal armor instead. But all done with this one. Gonna mount the cooler here, then get this whole thing inside the case. We've got problems. So I mounted this in such a way so that the radiator can actually curl its tubes as it needs to have this facing like this to fit inside of this case in the correct orientation. And this actually is the correct way to mount this. However, the spacing here does not provide enough room to mount memory. There's actually an overlap between the tubes and the DIMMs. So I tried putting a memory stick in and actually I can't. So that means I'm gonna have to spin this. Now I could spin it down so that the tubes are at the bottom, but that won't clear. I can't spin it up top because of these fins. That won't clear. Maybe there's enough room here. I'm not sure. So I'm going to have to spin it this way and then hope that one, it fits, and two, the orientation will allow the tubes to fit into this case correctly. So let's wish me luck. Let's talk about some issues here that I've been facing with this build. It is ambitious for a case of this size to support a 280mm radiator, but I don't know that it does that all that well with any kind of significant room to spare, because first of all, considering where I had to put the tubes down here at the bottom of the board, and yes, this is still a wire mess, I haven't done anything with those yet, that means that the tubes have to come out this way, and that means that I have to almost crush them in order to close this. But I can't close this because where I have to mount the radiator means that the fans bash into this I don't know, support bar here. I could push past it because this is pretty flexible. I guess I could just remove this, but like this interference, that's not all that great. Then I have the Eps cable, which as you can see is just basically stretched directly across this motherboard here and plugged in with essentially no slack because this cable is not long enough. Like I almost was going to put an extension on here. I thought I wasn't going to be able to plug it in. That is the max length of that cable. It has to go directly across the pump block. And if I had any kind of an air cooler on here, that wouldn't work at all. Also, it was pretty tight getting this connected, the 24 pin. But that was able to be done, so I'm not going to complain about that, but that was very tight. Like the lengths of these cables are supposed to be short because this is such a small enclosure, and I applaud them for that, but I think they made them a little too short. This was too ambitious on their end as far as cable routing and management, because you know, I can't do anything about this cable. It's just, this is the way it's going to look. Like I can't change anything about it unless I put extensions on here. So, anyway, now it's time to try to fit the GPU in, and we're going to see how that goes with the tubes as they are, because, like I said, they poke out this way, and that's exactly where the graphics card has to go. So let me see if I could button this up.
Well, it certainly took me a little bit longer than I initially anticipated that it would, considering that this seemed to be a pretty straightforward build. But we encountered some problems, we overcame some hurdles, and here is the Hyte Revolt 3 build with the brand new Intel 12 900K and an RTX 3080. Now, I did want to run through a couple of other issues that I encountered here and the end result and how this build came out. So one of the things that you might see as I'm panning through some of this B-roll is that the RTX 3080 itself actually mounted fine in the slot, but the top of the card is actually not parallel with the bottom of the case. And the reason for that is because of what I had mentioned earlier. The tubes from this AIO are just really difficult to manage inside of this kind of a case, given the orientation that I had to use for the block mounting. So the tubes actually angle outwards and they are kind of wedging themselves in between the GPU and the side of the power supply enclosure. And as a result, it pushes down on the GPU. And this is not a situation that I am very happy with. I am going to try to work on that. I would not recommend that you leave it that way if this is a build that you have at home or something that you're trying to replicate. That's going to cause damage potentially to the PCIe slot, the GPU, and the AIO. So don't want any of that. I wanted to just make sure that we got this build done and functional by the end of this video. So I left it that way for now. That will be addressed. Another thing you'll notice is that cable management in here, as I mentioned again earlier, was pretty tough. And as this is a pretty well opaque enclosure, you can't really see it. Like if I pan down the front of the case with the system on, you could see slight traces of RGB LEDs in there. But as a general rule, you can't really see through the side panel. So cable management becomes far less important than if you could see through a tempered glass pane or something along those lines. At the same time, you want to make sure that the interior of your case is easy to access and work on, and that means neatening things up. So I did tidy things up in the back of the case with a couple of twist ties and just made sure some cables were out of the way and that I could grab them if I needed to really quickly, and also so that they didn't get tangled up in the fans. Another thing that I was, I guess, mistaken on when I initially took this out of the case, because like I said, I hadn't worked with this at all. That was the first time you saw me open it up, is that the USB-C on the front panel is a great feature, but is only it gets a side thumb because it's just a pass-through. So it actually uses the USB-C port on the back of the motherboard and passes that through to the front. That's good because accessing the I/O on this case from the motherboard side is pretty difficult because it's actually up underneath because the motherboard is pointed down. So passing through that USB-C signal is actually pretty handy. The problem with this is that a lot of newer, especially higher end Mini ITX boards are coming with internal headers for USB 3.1, and this means that you're taking up that USB-C port at the back that you could potentially use for something else. And instead of, being able to have more than one, now you still only have the one, even though it is, I guess, in a more convenient spot. So pluses and minuses there, but it was a little disappointing that it wasn't an actual internal header that I could utilize. But with this build done, I was really surprised with how quiet it was. I didn't know exactly how the airflow was going to shake out in here because everything is so packed together, especially once you close everything up, but seems to be okay for now. You get a little bit of RGB going on as well, which is neat. But overall, I think I like the design aesthetic and the choice to make it without any clear panels. I like it simple like this. I like the bronze accent at the front. I think that's pretty cool. And I think the white version of this case especially is something that would be great as a desk piece. I haven't had a chance to test this system out in any kind of significant stressful environments, and we're going to do that for the next video. So stay tuned to the channel if you want to see this build tested with Windows 11 and all of your favorite games, or at least all of my favorite games, to give you an idea of the performance. So make sure you get subscribed if you don't want to miss that. Also consider following me on Twitter at BPS_customs. Check out the merchandise store. We got some merch down below linked. And if you want to pick up a shirt or something like that, I very much appreciate it. It's a way to support the channel. And that's about it, guys. I really appreciate your viewership. Thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this build in the Hyte Revolt 3. This is my very first Alder Lake system, and I have high hopes for it. See you next time.